Hi everyone, this is Nia. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be painting ASTER flowers. These are very cute tiny purple flowers, and as usual, let's begin by drawing it out first. I'm going to first draw out the frontal view of the flower, which is the easiest angle, and I started out by drawing a small circle for the center and a larger one surrounding it. This is to help us guide the placement of the petals to create a nice circular rotation. When I draw out the petals, I like to personally make them slightly uneven by creating some gaps or imperfect curved petals to make it look more flowy and organic. Using this concept, you can also place them slightly on an angle, which would make the circles more of an oval shape. If this is hard to visualize, you can also use a flat circular object or a cutout piece of paper and then looking at it from different angles to see if you can visualize what the shape will look like from different perspectives. Then after you have those base shapes down, you can continue by filling in the petals. You can do a few of these as practice, but once you're comfortable drawing it out with the guide, I would suggest to try to draw it without the guidelines and see if you're still able to create the overall circular form for the petals. It also helps when you don't draw the petals out in order, but to spread out the placement, which will help you to visualize the overall form instead of getting stuck in one position. The next element that I would like to include are the budding flowers. For this, you can either draw out small petals sideways, or if it's even smaller or younger, you can draw it out as little ovals or circular shapes with the small green area connecting the buds and the stem. The leaves for these flowers are quite long. It's the normal basic leaf shape, but just a bit more elongated. When they grow out of the stems, the leaves are quite small, closer to the top near the flowers as they're younger leaves, and as it gets more mature, it gets a bit larger as you get towards the bottom of the stem. Before painting straight on paper, I like to draw out a very loose composition so I can refer back to it. These ideation processes is just a very quick sketch, and I like to draw out the flowers as circles before adding the petals because it's much quicker that way and you get to drop down compositional ideas in a short period of time. The things that I like to take into consideration as I'm doing this are things like how many flowers I want to include and how to position them, as well as the length of the stems in comparison to the flowers and the size of the paper. After that, I go over the balance of the placement. I would have to add additional fillers, which are the young flowers, flower buds, and leaves in order to do that. So I scatter them around the main flowers and see which positions will give a good balanced composition. Then once I'm done with the main features, this is when I start to fill in the petals of the main flowers. I always like to sketch out a few of these before painting because it also lessens the intimidation of painting straight without pencil when you already have an idea in mind. The painting doesn't have to look exactly the same as the sketch, but the point is to know where to start so it's easier to fill in the rest of the composition. Next, I'm going to list down the colors that I used, and today I'll be using my Pentel set. The first colors are purple, red purple, pale orange, Prussian blue, and white, and these are going to be the main colors for the petals. The color of the petals will be mostly light pastel purple, but I like to use pale orange with white to mute the purple slightly so it's not overly saturated, and I use the red purple and Prussian blue to vary the tone of the purple, whether I want it to be more on the cooler side or the warmer. The next colors are yellow and vermilion, and I'm going to use this as the center of the flower. I'm also going to use some of the greens later on to mute these colors slightly. For the colors of the leaves, I'm going to use emerald green and yellow green as the main colors, but I'm also going to mix it with the other colors later to mute it down, like either the reds or the purples. Lastly, I'm also going to use black to add the intensity of any of the colors that I have, but I'm only going to use this very sparingly because it can turn the painting dull if it's overused. I'm going to start by painting the center of the flowers, and for this I'm going to just take some yellow and vermilion first, and then I'm also going to take some of the yellow-green to slightly mute those colors, so I'm just going to set it aside for now. For the mixture, I'm going to mix a tiny bit of that green to the yellow and also take some of the vermilion, so now the yellow is warmer and slightly muted. I paint this at the center of my page, and I use the tip of my brush to either paint circular scribbles or dots in a medium to thick consistency while also leaving some white negative space. Then I'm going to follow it up using much more vermilion to the previous mix and apply it around the outside of the yellow as little dots and let the colors mingle with each other, and just use a clean dry brush or tissue if the paint is traveling a bit too fast. Next, I'm mixing the colors for the petals. Personally, I like a cooler purple, so I'm going to add some of the Prussian blue on the side. You might think, then why do I mention red purple in the mix if I'm leaning more towards the bluish purple? Well, that's because if I do accidentally take too much blue, I can take it back to a purple much faster with the red purple compared to if I were to just use purple, because the red purple has a higher ratio of red within the color mixture. To turn it into a pastel color, I like to add the pale orange as it has a bit of white in the paint, but I like the fact that the pale orange also has a bit of orange, so it's also going to mute the bright purple slightly. But if you want the purple to be lighter but not muted, it would be better to just add the white without the pale orange. For this, I like to use a thin consistency, so I added a lot of water, and this way it could also lighten the colors drastically without adding too much white. However, thinner consistency paint is a bit harder to handle, which is why the white would help thicken the paint while still keeping the colors nice and light. So try to find the ratio that you're comfortable to work with. As you can see here, I'm painting the petals in random order as I mentioned before. This really helps to keep the placement more circular and helps you to be more aware of the angles. I'm speaking out of experience since when I try to paint petals in order, sometimes the angle of the petals become incorrect because I didn't follow the rotation well enough. But if you spread the main positions, it would help you to at least get the main angles correctly to help as anchor points. You can think of it like cutting a circular cake. It would be much easier to get even pieces if you cut straight down vertically and then horizontally, and then cutting both sides diagonally to get more equal pieces. Even if you add more cuts between those pieces, it would be much more even rather than to just cut small pieces one by one. Next, I'm going to paint some of the petals at the back, which is why I've left out some random gaps between the petals. For this, I added a bit more blue into the mix so the color becomes slightly darker. Then I paint this in between some of the petals and making sure that there is no pattern to keep things natural. Then using a thicker consistency of the exact same mixture, I painted really thinly in random areas again, and this slight build of value will give more volume to the petals without making it look bulky. Make sure though that there are still more of the light purple petals in comparison, so your eyes will adjust knowing that the main colors of the petals are the pastel purple still. As a finishing touch to this first flower, I like to bring a light glaze of orange mixture to the petals with a very thin consistency. This mix of hues will bring out a slight glow to the painting, so I'm just going to use it as little accents. I work at a very thin consistency and leave it for now, but this is something that we can add on to as a final touch towards the end, since we'll have a better understanding of the balance in comparison to the rest of the elements. Next, I'm going to paint the second flower by using the same method, but this time I've placed it on an angle so there's a slight variation in placement, which is what I decided to do. But if you're still uncomfortable with changing up the angles, it's also okay to just paint a few flowers from the front view. You might notice that the purple here is slightly more on the pinkish side, and that's fine. The tone of purple that you pick might also vary, and you can also change up the ratio according to your preferred tone. As I layer on the darker tones, notice that I like to slowly add them towards the center. I paint it that way to separate the lighter petals to make them look more delicate, because the tonal value of the pastel purple is very close to the white of the paper, which blends them slightly, so I decided to use the darker purple to break up the shapes. As the paint slowly dries, I also like to layer the center of the flower by mixing a little bit of purple to the orange. Then I applied it to the outer part of the center, touching the orange tone. This darker orange will help give it a rounder form so the center doesn't look as flat. So now I'm just going to create the third flower, and for this one, notice that I curve the petals slowly, and I think that by adding the curves to your petals, it will help create more dynamic to your painting, which I really enjoy seeing in this composition. And now I'm just going to repeat the same method, and I'll go back to you again when I'm ready to add the other elements. Let's get on to painting the stems. The main greens that I used are yellow green and emerald green, but this really doesn't matter too much. You can just use any of your favorite green mixtures. Then I also added purple to mute the green and also some yellow to warm it up on the side. And I just leave them unmixed, so I have a variation of greens that I can have quick access to. When I paint the stems, because the positions are somewhat hidden, I always try to align it with the center of the flower. Then at the bottom of the stem, I like to layer a darker tone of green, in which I used some black in the green mixture. And I'm also going to add some flower buds and young flowers in different growth stages on the side to fill in the page. And this is basically where you can adjust the composition according to the positions of your main flowers. I try to not make the flower buds too small though, because these are supposed to be small flowers, so in comparison the size wouldn't be too drastically different. For this young flower, I painted it from the side view because I'm imagining that it's not in full bloom yet, but I'm also going to include the same darker purples in between the petals to balance out the details of the painting and also to make it cohesive with the rest of the flowers. I'm also going to use the same green mixture for the leaves, and I first start by painting the small leaves on the flower buds and also fill in the larger ones at the bottom. Since we have most of the elements down already, this is where you can adjust certain things to balance out the composition further. So where I felt like the top gap between the flowers are a bit awkward, I decided to add a couple of flower buds to fill in the space. And after I find a good compositional balance, this is where I also start to add little details, especially for the leaves, which are looking very flat in comparison to the flowers. For the details of the leaves, I used more or less the same color mixture, but I just changed up the ratio slightly, and I also used a thicker consistency in order for the top layer to be visible enough. The things that I like to do to add little details are painting half of the leaf with a darker color while also leaving some negative spaces, and I also try to vary the value of the colors to add depth. So between the green color mixture, we have a lot of colors. The base green, as I mentioned before, is a mix of yellow green and emerald green. And then we have the three colors to adjust the tone, like the purple to mute the color, yellow to warm up the green, and black to darken the green. So you have all these options that you can work with in order to change up the ratio to create different tones. I also like to layer more darker tones for any of the petals to make sure that everything is balanced and the colors are complementing each other with good contrast. As a final touch-up to finish the whole painting, I want to create more of a dynamic feeling, and of course you guys know by now that I love to add splatters, and I first use the purple mixture and apply it by tapping my loaded brush with either another brush or some form of stick. Then I like to take some of the paint from the splatters to spread it out as little circles so there's a variation in size. Last but not least, I also like to take a light orange color to give it little accents, as I feel like the color complements the purple well and it also brightens up the whole painting. And that's pretty much it. Before I go, I'd like to mention that I've been turning on my community contributions to my videos, so if any of you would like to write subtitles in your own language so we can share this with more people around the world, or even just write it in English, I would really greatly appreciate it. So this is the finished flower. Like usual, all of the tools and links to my social media will be in the description box. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!